anything they want. And we cannot stop them. Whoa. You see what I mean about awkward? You see what I mean about why doing the right thing and setting up infrastructure and going through all these so we're ready for disclosure is going to soften the ire of the American people when the really tough questions will be asked, and they will be asked. Now, let's hypothetically take it up another notch. I mean, if in the discomfort zone, okay, let's go up another notch. Now, this is hypothetical, but imagine this question. I'm not saying this is true. I think it's more likely not true, but it could be true. Here's your another question to the press secretary or the spokesperson for the Department of Defense. There have been rumors that the United States government may have made a deal with at least one of the extraterrestrial species that in return from some really cool tech you can't get on Amazon.com, we sort of gave them a carte blanche to pretty much take who they needed to do what they got to do, plus the odd cow and what have you. And imagine that the answer to that is yes. Are you starting to see the public relations dilemma that the government's going to face, regardless of whether it does the preparation on this as it is doing now, or just comes right out and says it? It's massive, and I'm just getting warmed up. So let's now take a step back a little bit and get back to the fundamental premise. The message that I've been getting out now in hundreds of podcasts, but is not turning up on Fox. It's not turning up on MSNBC, ABC, NBC. It's not in the Washington Post. It's not in the New York Times. It's nowhere. I'd like to get on those places and talk about this, but I don't know. I am, as that little white guy up back there says, maybe crazy. All right. All of what is being done is to create the infrastructure and the process that allows the president of the United States in a minimally political way and in a way that makes sense and is transparent, since these hearings, there's already been one. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it happened. It was watched by a lot of people. The Senate Intel committees are going to be watched by, pick a number, 100 million, 500 million, 800 million, big number. This process that will then deliver to the president the means by which the president can say, look, like you, the evidence is compelling. I've talked to certain key people. I've made some queries. And this is clearly the case that we are not alone and we've been visited. And you want to know a lot about this, and I'm going to do my best to see you get that information. And by the way, we happen to have some very nice processes set up that will allow that information to move forward. And then the information process will begin, along with endless hearings. More hearings will go on for months and months and months and months. Every committee is going to want to hear it, right? The Committee for Public Works or Canals or whatever the hell is going to have a hearing on this one way or another. I mean, it's the biggest issue in the history of the human race, and people in politics like to get in front of cameras. This will be a great opportunity. So it's about preparing for disclosure itself. It is not about finding out what this phenomena is. And for those that are in that place, it's driving them crazy. Because if you really think that this is about trying to find out what the phenomena is, there's always a statement or something happening that will drive you up the wall. It was like, wait a minute. You're trying to find out what the phenomena. Why did you do that? Why did you say that? Why haven't you done this? Why didn't you fund Arrow? And so forth and so forth and so forth. There's all kinds of things that are happening which are incongruous, which are creating cognitive dissonance. I understand. But let me say something else about activism. There's a couple of things that activists have to do in order to succeed. If you don't do these things, generally, you don't succeed. One of them is what I call perspective. It's about vantage point. And what do I mean by that? The nature of the world is incredibly complex, and people are busy taking care of themselves and surviving. And so the vast majority of all people live in a relatively defined space that they can control and understand and do their business and take care of themselves and their families. And they do not have time to climb to the tops of mountains and look down to the bigger perspective, except, of course, Google Earth now allows you to do that. And so people do that. I do, right? You may be just living in a little place by yourself with no windows or whatever, but at any time you can go on Google Earth and you can find any country. You can go down and you look at the streets and what have you. It's the big picture. Well, that's cool, and it's amazing that we can do that. And it's another example of why the world can no longer tolerate these kinds of ridiculous lies and misrepresentations from government. I mean, I can look at the whole planet. There's a few places that are pixelated out, but overall, I can pretty much look at any place on the planet. Fantastic. That's called perspective. Well, Google Earth could only go so far. If you're talking about perspective on a major thing that is happening in the world that could affect your life, people just don't have the opportunity or the time to get to a vantage point. That's where the activist comes in. The activist tries to find a vantage point, like, getting up on a big, tall ladder or getting off to a good angle where you can kind of see what's going on, whatever, get a vantage point where they can get a perspective on what is happening and then convey that to the general public so the public can make a decision about it, to decide to what extent they want to exceed, suppress, push back, whatever, to what extent it's valuable. That's what an activist does. It's one of the things they do. Vantage point. And the other thing an activist does is language. Basically, all injustice is accompanied by the language of injustice. I don't care what the issue is. The authority, the state, always generates language which supports this injustice. So, in fact, they're so good at it that in order to talk about the injustice, you have to use the state's language, which right away gets you into hot water. Right? So what the activists do? They create a different language. They change the language. They come up with terms and phrases and words that more properly reflect the truth of the matter and not simply the government's position and or status. And this was true of the ET issue. It's true of every activist movement in history. And there are examples of this. UFO was a real problem. UAP was very helpful. It was so successful in terms of moving things forward that UFO is now back and totally cool. Well, that's great. That doesn't always work that way. All right. UFO cover-up, not helpful and not accurate. Truth embargo, more appropriate, and so forth. Abductees, as the only term to refer to experiencers, not helpful. Contactees, as a larger subject or as an umbrella term, better. So you've got contactees that come in different types. You've got psychic contact, you've got abduction, you have experiencers, right, which usually refers to people that are having a less of a more pleasant engagement, and so forth. Language, accurate. You have to make the language accurate, and it has to reflect the need of the activist movement. So activists do that. But let's get back to perspective and vantage point. I have a perspective on this and a vantage point because it's all I do is find a vantage point and look at stuff, right? There are people and colleagues of mine that are literally granular in it, literally in the middle of it, right? Or they're researchers focus on a particular part of it and they go deep and deep into that. Right? And their citizens are trying to follow it here, there, and everywhere. There was literally a fire hose now. And they're all trying to decide what's going on. Do I like it? Do I not like it? Where's it gone? What's happening? And it's really confusing. And it doesn't make a lot of sense in a lot of cases because, again, of the unusual nature of this issue and the way it's playing out. I mean, this is three-dimensional chess. The civil rights movement was regular chess. This is three-dimensional chess. No disrespect to the civil rights movement, believe me. one of the greatest movements of all time, certainly in the United States. I happen to think this is the most profound movement in history, but for various reasons, not again demean in any other movement, but this one is really